European fans came to America for the World Cup believing they already knew what to expect. Bigger cities, longer distances, a louder, more excessive version of life they had back home. But after weeks of actually living here, something unexpected happened. The things they once questioned began making sense. The differences they laughed at became harder to dismiss, and somewhere along the way, some fans started confronting an uncomfortable possibility. What if America hadn't been falling behind Europe at all? What if, in ways they never noticed from across the Atlantic, Europe was the one struggling to keep up? Because once they experienced certain parts of American life for themselves, going back to what they had always considered normal might never feel quite the same again. So what did European fans discover in America that they couldn't believe was real? And why did it take coming here to finally understand it? Here are 5 things that may have completely changed the way they see America, and perhaps even Europe itself. For many European fans, one of the first things they noticed after arriving in America was also something they had spent years criticizing from a distance. Everything seemed unnecessarily large. The highways were wider, neighborhoods stretched farther, stores occupied enormous pieces of land, and traveling between cities involved distances that could carry someone across several countries back home. At first, it looked like another example of American excess. But after spending weeks moving through the country during the World Cup, that enormous scale began to reveal something more valuable than simply bigger buildings or longer roads. It creates room to live. Across much of Europe, millions of people live in cities shaped centuries before the automobile or modern expectations of personal space. That history gives European cities extraordinary beauty, but it also creates limitations that are increasingly difficult to escape. Historic streets cannot simply be widened, old neighborhoods cannot easily expand, and growing populations must compete for a limited amount of space. The result is often smaller homes, tighter streets, difficult parking, and private outdoor space becoming a luxury rather than an ordinary part of life. America developed under very different circumstances. For generations, ordinary families could imagine a home with several bedrooms, a driveway, a garage, and a backyard where children could play. Entire communities grew around that possibility. And for millions of Americans, having more space was never simply about having more possessions. It represented privacy, independence, ownership, and the belief that there was still room for a family to build something of its own. That difference can feel surprisingly personal after living on both sides of it. A European visitor may initially look at an American suburb and see wasteful distances between houses. After several weeks, the same person may begin noticing the quiet streets, children playing in their own yards, families gathering outside, and ordinary people enjoying a level of private space that would cost a fortune in many major European cities. What looked excessive from a distance can feel remarkably comfortable once it becomes part of everyday life. The same advantage extends far beyond the home. American cities have had room to build enormous airports, stadium districts, shopping centers, recreational spaces, and infrastructure capable of serving populations on a scale that older European cities often struggle to accommodate. A stadium can become the center of an entire district rather than being squeezed into a centuries-old urban landscape, while roads and communities can expand around changing needs instead of constantly forcing modern life into spaces designed for another era. Europe's density has clear advantages, especially for walking and public transportation, but those advantages come with compromises. Limited space places pressure on housing, parking, infrastructure, and the simple expectation of privacy. Europeans have become remarkably good at adapting to those constraints, but adaptation is not the same thing as abundance. Perhaps that is why America's scale can feel so different after experiencing it rather than simply looking at it on a map. For Americans who grew up with a backyard, learned to drive on open roads, or watch new communities rise where there had once been empty land, none of this may seem extraordinary. Yet these ordinary things represent something increasingly difficult to reproduce elsewhere. The physical freedom to spread out, build, own, and create a life with room to grow. European fans may have arrived believing America's enormous size was one of its greatest weaknesses. After living inside that scale for several weeks, some may return home realizing that what they once dismissed as excess was actually one of America's greatest advantages. European fans came to America expecting to watch football. What many may not have expected was to discover that in America, the game is often only one part of the experience. In Europe, sport is deeply rooted in tradition. Historic stadiums, generations of supporters, local rivalries, and loyalty passed from parents to children give European football something America cannot simply recreate. But America has spent decades mastering something different, taking a single event and building an entire experience around it. A major game can begin hours before anyone reaches their seat. Restaurants and gathering spaces fill with fans, music, and entertainment spread through the surrounding district, and people arrive early because there is already something worth experiencing. Inside the venue, technology, food, merchandise, and presentation are designed around one idea. People should remember the entire day, not just the final score. For some European visitors, that can feel excessive at first, but after weeks of experiencing it during the World Cup, the difference becomes harder to dismiss. I thought we were coming here for 90 minutes of football. Somehow, America turned the entire day into the event. And this philosophy goes far beyond sports. Across America, theme parks become destinations of their own. Shopping and dining districts are built for families to spend hours together, and entertainment complexes combine multiple experiences in one place. Americans have become remarkably good at asking a simple question. If people are already coming, why not give them more reasons to stay? Perhaps the greatest proof of how successful that idea became is how much of the world eventually adopted it. The modern theme park, the blockbuster spectacle, the halftime show, the massive entertainment district, and the idea of turning major sporting events into global productions have all been shaped heavily by American culture. For decades, the rest of the world has watched American entertainment, visited American attractions, and borrowed from the way America presents experiences. What feels completely normal to Americans today helped redefine what millions of people around the world expect entertainment to feel like. For generations of American families, however, the real value was always more personal: memories. Older Americans may remember taking their children to a ball game, an amusement park, or a major attraction and realizing years later that the strongest memory was not always the main event. It was the excitement of arriving, eating together, seeing the lights come on, and talking about the day on the drive home. That is something America understood remarkably well. People rarely remember an experience as a single moment. They remember the entire story surrounding it. Europe has history and traditions that America cannot manufacture, but America developed a different strength: the ability to make an ordinary day feel like an occasion. For European fans who experienced this repeatedly during the World Cup, the contrast may have become impossible to ignore. Europe gave us the history of the game, but America showed us how big the experience around it could become. European fans came to America wondering whether Americans understood their game. Some may leave realizing that America understood something else exceptionally well: how to turn a few hours of entertainment into a memory people carry for years. One of the biggest surprises for European fans may have had nothing to do with stadiums, technology, or the size of the country. It was how quickly complete strangers began treating them as if they belonged there. In many parts of Europe, people can be warm and deeply welcoming once a relationship has been established, but interactions with strangers are often more reserved. Sitting beside someone in a restaurant does not necessarily lead to a conversation, and walking through a city wearing a foreign team's jersey may attract attention without anyone actually approaching you. America can feel remarkably different. European fans wearing their national colors could find themselves being stopped by Americans who simply wanted to know where they were from, which cities they had visited, and whether they were enjoying the country. A conversation could begin in a restaurant, at a gas station, in a hotel lobby, or while waiting outside a stadium, often without any introduction beyond a smile and a simple question. We kept waiting for people to treat us like tourists. Instead, they kept treating us like guests. To Americans, these moments may seem almost too ordinary to notice. Talking to strangers, offering directions, recommending a restaurant, or welcoming someone to a city can feel like nothing more than everyday friendliness. But to someone coming from a more reserved culture, that openness can leave a surprisingly strong impression. There is something deeply American behind it. The United States has spent generations absorbing people who arrived from somewhere else, carrying different languages, traditions, and accents. The country has never been culturally uniform, and perhaps that is one reason Americans became so comfortable asking strangers where they came from while still making room for them in the conversation. Being different does not automatically mean standing outside the group. That may be one of America's quieter achievements. A country of more than 300 million people spread across an enormous territory and shaped by countless backgrounds still maintains a powerful culture of casual connection. Americans may disagree about almost everything, but put a visitor in front of them wearing the colors of another country, and curiosity can quickly replace distance. For European fans spending weeks far from home, those small interactions could matter more than expected. The person who helped when they looked lost, the family that invited them into a conversation, or the stranger who simply said, "Welcome to America," may never see them again. Yet those are often the encounters travelers remember long after famous landmarks begin to blur together. I expected America to feel foreign. The strange thing is how quickly people stopped making it feel that way. Europe has its own powerful traditions of community and hospitality, but they are often built around relationships that already exist. America's particular strength is how quickly that circle can sometimes open to someone who was not there yesterday. And perhaps that is why some European fans may leave America with a feeling they never expected. They came as outsiders to watch a tournament, but somewhere between the matches, the cities, and thousands of small conversations, many may have stopped feeling entirely like outsiders at all. America impressed them with its size and entertained them with its spectacle, but what they may remember most is something much simpler. For a few weeks, a country full of strangers made them feel strangely at home. One of the strangest adjustments for European fans in America may have been something Americans barely notice anymore. Almost everything comes with a choice. At first, it can feel overwhelming. Walk into an American supermarket and a simple product may occupy an entire aisle. Order a meal and suddenly there are questions about size, sides, toppings, sauces, substitutions, and how you want almost everything prepared. Visit a store and the same basic item may come in dozens of versions, designed for different budgets, tastes, and lifestyles. For many Europeans, the first reaction can be disbelief. I wanted to buy one thing. America gave me 40 versions of it. It is easy to laugh at this as another example of American excess, but after living with it for several weeks, the deeper difference begins to emerge. America has built an enormous part of its consumer culture around the assumption that individuals should not have to want exactly the same thing. That idea extends far beyond supermarket shelves. Restaurants encourage customers to modify orders. Businesses compete by offering different levels of service. Stores remain open across broader hours because people live on different schedules. Products are designed for increasingly specific needs. And when enough people want something that does not yet exist, someone will usually see an opportunity to sell it. This is one of the forces that has made American consumer culture so influential around the world. Competition creates excess, but it also creates constant pressure to improve, specialize, and give customers another option. Companies know that loyalty cannot simply be assumed because another business is always waiting to offer something faster, easier, cheaper, or better suited to the individual. Europe certainly offers enormous variety, especially across its many cultures and countries, but the experience can be different. Smaller markets, more limited retail space, and stricter traditions around certain products often mean fewer options in one place. In America, choice itself has become part of the expectation. For European fans, the difference may only become obvious when the novelty wears off. What initially felt ridiculous can gradually become convenient. They begin knowing exactly how they want their order prepared. They discover products they did not know existed. They become accustomed to the idea that if one place does not suit them, there are usually several alternatives nearby. At first, all the choices drove me crazy. Now I'm wondering how I'm supposed to go back to having 3. For older Americans, this abundance carries a history that can easily be forgotten. Many grew up watching supermarkets expand, new businesses arrive, and entire industries compete for the American consumer. The extraordinary range of choices available today did not appear by accident. It grew from a culture that rewarded invention, competition, and the belief that ordinary people should have the power to decide what works best for them. And perhaps that is the real difference. Choice in America is not only about having 50 kinds of cereal or 20 ways to order a coffee. At its best, it reflects something much more deeply rooted in the American character, the expectation that the individual gets to decide. European fans may have laughed at America's endless options when they arrived, but after weeks of being asked, "How would you like it?" they may return home realizing how quickly a simple question can become difficult to give up. Perhaps the most powerful thing European fans discovered in America was not something the country built at all. It was what America chose not to build over. Beyond the stadiums and cities lies another version of the country. Enormous stretches of mountains, deserts, forests, canyons, and coastlines protected for generations to experience. For visitors accustomed to the densely settled landscapes of Europe, the sheer amount of untouched space can be difficult to comprehend until they stand inside it themselves. Europe has extraordinary natural beauty, but centuries of dense settlement have transformed much of its landscape. Towns, farms, roads, and human history are rarely far away. America still offers places where the opposite is true, where a person can look toward the horizon and see a landscape that feels almost untouched by modern life. For some European visitors, that experience can change the meaning of America's size entirely. I knew America was big. I didn't understand what that meant until I stood somewhere and couldn't see the end of it. What deserves particular pride is not simply that America inherited extraordinary landscapes. Previous generations made the decision to protect many of them. The American National Park idea helped establish a powerful principle: that some of the country's greatest treasures should not belong only to whoever could afford to buy them, but should be preserved for the public and passed from one generation to the next. That legacy gave Americans places such as Yellowstone, Yosemite, the Grand Canyon, and the Great Smoky Mountains, but its deeper value is larger than any individual destination. Families who visited these places decades ago can now watch their grandchildren stand before many of the same landscapes. In a country known around the world for building, expanding, and constantly moving forward, America also had the wisdom to decide that some things were valuable precisely because they were left alone. European fans traveling through the country during the World Cup may have arrived focused almost entirely on its cities. Yet those who ventured beyond them could discover something no stadium or photograph can fully communicate: the feeling of standing inside a landscape so vast that human life suddenly seems very small. Back home, history is everywhere you look. Here, sometimes it feels like the world existed before us and simply never left. Europe can preserve castles, villages, and landscapes shaped by centuries of civilization. America possesses something different on an extraordinary scale: wilderness large enough to remind people what existed before cities occupied almost every horizon. And perhaps that is one of the greatest gifts earlier generations of Americans left behind. They did not simply inherit a beautiful country. They made sure that millions of people who had not yet been born would still have the chance to experience it. For European fans, the final surprise may therefore be the most unexpected of all. They came to America expecting everything to feel modern, commercial, and oversized. Instead, some may leave remembering the places where America felt almost timeless. And once you have stood somewhere that makes the rest of the world suddenly feel crowded, it can be difficult to forget just how much of America is still open. Conclusion: European fans came to America believing they already understood the country. They had seen the movies, heard the stereotypes, followed the debates, and in many cases already decided which parts of American life Europe had supposedly done better. Then they actually lived here. Over several weeks, The differences stopped being ideas viewed from across the Atlantic and became experiences they could feel for themselves. They discovered what America's enormous scale gives ordinary people, how the country turns entertainment into memories, how easily strangers can make outsiders feel welcome, and what it is like to live in a culture where choice is treated almost as an expectation. None of this means Europe suddenly has nothing to offer. Europe still possesses history, traditions, walkable cities, and ways of life that Americans admire for good reason. But perhaps the mistake was assuming that because America does things differently, it must be doing them wrong. For some European fans, that assumption may be much harder to carry home than it was to bring here. They came for the World Cup expecting to judge America as a host. Instead, America quietly gave them something they never expected, a reason to question some of the things they had always taken for granted back home. And perhaps that is the uncomfortable truth behind this entire journey. America did not need to become more like Europe to impress them. The things that surprised them most were often the things America had spent generations doing in its own way, building bigger, creating experiences, welcoming outsiders, offering more choices, and protecting enough of its land to leave future generations something truly extraordinary. So, can Europe no longer keep up with America? Perhaps that question is too simple. But after weeks of experiencing a side of America they could never fully understand from thousands of miles away, some European fans may finally be asking a question they never expected to ask at all. What if America was never as far behind as they thought? And what if, in some of the things that shape everyday life most deeply, it was already ahead?